Hey guys, today we're having a look at the Simagic Alpha Mini, in my opinion the best wheelbase you can buy in the 10 to 12 Newton meter range. The usual disclaimer first, this loaner unit was provided by Simagic for the review, but obviously they do not get to see the video before it's posted and all the opinions are my own. So for whatever reason, I've pretty much ignored Simagic in the past. I don't really know why, maybe because the distributor network was a little bit complicated in the past and I had no idea how to actually get access to their gear, but well, here we go. I have been testing the Alpha Mini and I've also been testing their pedals, the P1000, and spoiler first, both products are absolutely amazing. In this review we'll talk about the Alpha Mini, but there will be a review of the P1000 on the channel as well soon. We'll start with the price. Here in Germany, you pay 649 euros, including taxes. And the design seems to be very inspired by a competitor. And the build quality also is very, very good. I think it's pretty much a nicer looking Simacube. I like the carbon fiber accent in the front and the logo with the LED. Looks very nice. We'll start with the mounting options, and I think this is the base with the best mounting options on the market. We do have the bottom mount option. It uses the Asetek hole pattern. So if you have a rig where you mount it from the bottom, you can do this. You can also mount it from the sides. These holes here are about 15 millimeters from the bottom, so it will work perfectly fine with the typical 80-20 profiles for side mounting. Or you can also just front mount it. It uses the same hole pattern as the Simacube 2 Ultimate. It's pretty much you can mount this however you wish. The only thing that is a little odd, we have the connection for power and USB on the side. So if you use something like me, the SimCore front mount, for example, the brackets will cover this. So you will have to mount it 90 degrees rotated with the cables facing up. Not a big deal, but the logo in the front will show to the right side. I don't know if your OCD can handle this, but yeah, it's not a big deal. And if you want to get really, really picky, basically the only complaint regarding build quality I found, you have the two holes for the front mount on top, and the screw will just go through it, come out of the other side. But on the bottom you have pretty much two pieces. You have that front piece and you have the center piece, and both parts are threaded, but it does not really align. So you can screw in the screw through the front piece, but it will basically stop and you cannot access the center piece threads because it's not perfectly aligned. Maybe just put a normal hole in the center piece so the screw goes through, but let's be honest, you can also just use screws that are not too long and then it's not really a big deal. According to Simagic, this is a 10 Newton meter base, but honestly, I think it feels more than that. It feels more powerful than the Moza R12, for example, which is rated at 12. And it's probably in that sweet spot force feedback range for most people. I personally prefer a bit more FFB to have the headroom and to be able to run really high force feedback. So I actually really would love to check out their Alpha Ultimate with 23 Newton meters, I think. But like I said, for most people, this will be fine. But with a smaller base like this, what you have to consider is overheating and clipping of the force feedback. But more on that later. We do have a servo motor with an 18-bit encoder. That means it can measure an angle with a resolution of, I have to read that, 0.00137 degrees. Should definitely be sufficient. And it's more than most competitors in this price range. There's pretty much only the offerings from Simacube and Asetek that offer 22 or 24-bit encoders. Whether you really will notice a difference between an 18-bit and a 22 or 24-bit encoder, I doubt it, but I also haven't tested it. The motor does feel very smooth. You notice a tiny bit of cogging when you turn it, when the motor is not powered on, but it's pretty much in line with the offerings from Simacube, Asetek, VRS, and it's completely gone and super smooth once you turn on the unit. Many competitors in this price range use BLDC motors, which will never feel as good as the PMSM servo motor type that is being used in something like the Simacube or the Simagic Alpha Mini. And this thing still feels smoother when turned off than some of the competitors when turned on. The motor is very compact and light with very low mechanical inertia, which allows higher acceleration of the motor, which then will lead to a great responsiveness in the force feedback. Then on the front, it uses the NRG style quick release, which in my opinion is the best on the market. I don't really want to say there's no flex, because there's always flex. It just depends on when you will see it, like the force you need to trigger the flex, but there's pretty much no flex in this QR. And Simagic actually was the first manufacturer to adopt the NRG quick release in 2018, and they modified it for simracing to get the power connection onto it. All the data connection to their wheels is done wirelessly, but I think it's a very, very clever idea. Just use a proven excellent QR from the market and then adopt it to the sim racing needs. According to Simagic, they also patented this quick release, but I guess they didn't do it very well considering that competitors like Moza or Camus, for example, are using pretty much the same idea, but it's pretty much plug and play. You put on the wheel, you do not have to configure anything. It automatically connects to the base using some 2.4 gigahertz wireless communication, and it's really easy to use, and I've never had any issues with dropped connections. And the wireless power is actually done very clever. There's no cable going from the back of the unit with the electronics to the front. We'll actually take this apart and I'll show you how it works. So if you loosened the clamp, you can take the whole front assembly off, and you see there's no direct connection between the base and the quick release part. And how it's being done, you can see here in the back, there's a little PCB, and I can't really take this off completely to show you on camera, but think of it like a wireless charger for your phone. So there's the power transmitter in the base that sends the power wirelessly to this other PCB on the receiver, which is the quick release shaft assembly. And then when the shaft rotates, it still will get the power independent of the position it's in, because the circular power delivery board and the circular power receiver board will always be on top of each other, and there's always continuous power. I think this is a very clever idea to just have the power being transferred via these two PCBs and then just communicate to the wheel wirelessly. And then once the power arrived at the receiving end on the QR, there's a little cable that goes through the shaft, goes to this PCB, and you can see there are some pads for ground and power. And if we look at the steering wheel, you can see there are some of these pogo pins to receive the power, and then the wheel can establish the wireless communication to the base. Very, very clever idea and well executed by Simagic. Next, we'll have a quick look at their new SimPro Software version 2. And it's a very decent looking software. You have an overview with all the most important settings at a glance when you start it. The UI sometimes can feel a little bit overwhelming, but we are in sim racing and most softwares just are like that, to be honest. But it is much better than the old software, I think. And if we go into the more detailed section for the steering wheel, you have the typical stuff like the rotation angle and how the bump stop will feel. And then obviously the strength, I would recommend, especially on weaker bases like that, always set this to 100% and then turn down the force feedback in the game. Then there's the smoothness filter. Think of it like a kind of low pass filter. It will filter out high frequency noise and make the force feedback feel a little bit more, well, smooth. But I think it kind of costs a lot of detail, and I personally wouldn't go higher than 1 or 2 in this filter. Then rotation speed. It basically controls how fast the wheel can react in terms of changing the angular velocity. If you turn this too high, the wheel can oscillate, but don't confuse this with slew rate. It's actually really a setting how fast the base can turn and not how fast it can change the torque of the force feedback output. Because there would be the feedback detail, which is more like the slew rate on other bases. They say you can enhance the suspension effects with that, but I think that description is maybe a little bit misleading. It's pretty much how fast the torque arrives in your hand. And then you also have the feedback frequency filter, which is pretty much like the interpolation filter from other bases. If you have a game with a high force feedback frequency, like ACC for example, you want to turn this very low. And if you have a game with a slow force feedback refresh rate, like iRacing for example, you want to turn this a little bit up. Then in the advanced settings, you can also configure a centering spring for older games, or something that I actually like is the center damping, which I have at around 10 to 14% usually, which helps a little bit with the oscillations when you let go of the wheel. All right, let's talk about the force feedback next. And I actually was surprised how good and detailed it is. I'm used to much higher force feedback than what this base can provide, so the reduced headroom definitely is noticeable. But like I said earlier, I think it's probably enough for most people. And Simagic also provided me with this GTC steering wheel, which is 325 millimeters. Actually a very nice steering wheel, but I personally think it's not a good fit for this base, because I would recommend to go with something that is a bit lighter and more compact, so you can feel as much force feedback in your hands as possible. So when I have been testing this base, I was using the GSI X29, which feels like a very good fit for the base. Hashtag ad. But honestly, smaller, lighter wheels like this, or for example the Cube F Core, are in my opinion a better fit. Simagic also has the FX line formula wheels, which I would recommend to pair with a base like this. I will make a review of the GTC wheel as well, but I will do that when I pair it with a stronger base and not with the Alpha Mini. But anyways, back to the force feedback. I set the base to 34 Newton meter in game on iRacing, which will only clip here and there and feels very nice overall. By the way, 34 Newton meters, that means that if the virtual steering rack, the simulated steering rack on iRacing, will have a force of 34 Newton meters, that will then be mapped to 100% of what the base can put out. So if you actually want to decrease the force force feedback, you want to increase this number. So let's say you set it to 50 instead, then the simulated steering rack will have to have a force of 50 Newton meters to map that on what the base can put out. And once I adapted to the lower torque output, I actually was matching my lap times that I did with my Simcube 2 Pro. All the details are there, you can absolutely feel what the car is doing. And I think the only thing they could improve are the oscillations when you let go of the wheel. It's not terrible, but I think Simcube is doing this the best. And I have yet to see anyone being close to Simcube when it comes to this oscillation-free operation. I mean, yeah, you can definitely tweak the settings to get less oscillations, but then you will lose detail and it's always a compromise. Also, something that I have been reading on the internet in the last few weeks is people report that the bass gets weaker once you use it a lot on high force feedback and it gets hot. It also seemed to be talked about more now that some companies use it in their marketing, but I personally think this is pretty much irrelevant on a motor like this. Torque reduction is something that will happen and that has to happen because according to CE regulations, and obviously this is a CE compliant product, once the surface of the base reaches a specific temperature, 70 degrees according to CE, it has to reduce the torque output in order not to get hotter. You're not allowed to have touchable surfaces get higher than 70 degrees because 70 degrees is hot. But I actually did some tests, and this is not super scientific. I basically used a force meter and then measured the force that I had to put at a specific point of the steering wheel. This is roughly 14 centimeters from the center to hold the wheel outside of the allowed steering range. So if you go over the bump stop, the base will basically put out the maximum torque to get it back within that configured wheel range. So I basically went over those 900 degrees rotation and then held the wheel stationary and measured the force. And the measurements I did, they will not have the perfect absolute accuracy because the tools that I use, it's a relatively affordable force meter. You can spend thousands on these things and this is like a cheaper unit for 150 euros or so. And I also used my Uni pizza oven thermometer to measure the surface temperature of the base. By the way, if you like pizza, then do yourself a favor and get one of those Uni ovens. This is not sponsored, but you can thank me later. Anyways, so this should not give the perfect absolute accuracy, but it will be good enough to compare it relatively. So what I did, I turned on the base, measured the surface temperature, very simple like that. It was 22 degrees, well we have 24 here right now because the room is a bit hotter, but 22 degrees after startup, and I measured the torque output at 13.5 Newton meters. Like I said, this might not be the perfect 13.5, it might be 11, it might be 14, whatever. It's just to compare it to the numbers I got once the base heated up. What I did then is I drove for 2 hours with way too high force feedback settings, like I was clipping all the time. I actually had it in-game set to 20 Newton meters, which is, don't use that, it's too high, you can't really feel a lot of details. It's actually surprising how quick you can still go with a base that is clipping all the time. But anyways, I drove for 2 hours like that, then measured the surface temperature, which was 50 degrees, and the torque output that I measured using the force meter was 13.2 Newton meters. So a drop of 0.3 over 2 hours, which I think is fine, and I don't think anybody would actually be able to tell that from just driving the car, and I don't think it will be noticeable, especially since the base will not get as hot if you use a reasonable amount of force feedback, like 34 for example, where you barely get any clipping. So a 0.3 drop is fine in this case. And then I've done another test that you should definitely not do at home. What I've done is I turned the wheel over the bump stop so it will put out the full torque to go back into the allowed wheel range, and I held it there for 10 minutes. Don't do that at home, it's not good for the base. It will heat up quite a lot, it will use a lot of power, but I was curious what will happen, so I did that anyways. Sorry Simagic, the base still works, the loaner unit, so that's good. But after 10 minutes of doing that, I measured the surface temperature. You don't want to touch it at this point because it's hot. It was 68 degrees, so barely below that 70C limit from the CE tests. And what I measured then was a torque of 12.6 Newton meters. So roughly 1 Newton meter less than with a cold base. And like I said, this is a completely irrelevant scenario that will never happen in real life. But I think from 13.5 to 12.6 is still pretty much negligible. And I personally doubt that anybody actually will feel that. Especially it's not like you drive, it's 13.5 and then bam, it's 12.6 anymore. It's a slow process of torque reduction. So I really do not think that is noticeable. All right, with that out of the way, I think we need to talk about the competition. And I think this is the best base that you can buy at this price point. There's nothing that really comes close. Simagic also has a very good ecosystem these days. Even if you do not like their steering wheels, a wheelside QR is 79 euros, which I think is a fair price considering that you get the best QR on the market. So you can just add your favorite wheel. No, I'm kidding. Just add your favorite wheel. I would recommend a smaller diameter for this and you're good to go. The biggest competitor in terms of price is the Mozar R12. It's also 649 euros, but I think the Simagic Alpha Mini is better at any point pretty much, except for maybe the software. I think Mozar has a cleaner UI. They also have a few more options to customize the force feedback, but apart from that, I think the Simagic is doing everything better. Then there's nothing really from Fanatec in that range that I would recommend. There's the new Club Sport DD coming soon, which should be significantly smoother than their current offerings, at least if you look at those explosion pictures that they showed at the expo. But we'll have to see how that one performs. But then there's also the Asetek La Prima bundle at 1050 euros. Unfortunately, you cannot buy the base alone. And honestly, I'm not really a fan of how the La Prima steering wheel looks like, but I do have to say that it's still a good wheel. I do have the Forte base here, which also feels great and has a good QR. And if the La Prima feels like the Forte, just with less headroom. I mean, it's using exactly the same motor, just with tamed down electronics, power supply, no LEDs and stuff like that, but the motor is exactly the same. Then I think this would also be a great option. The force feedback of both units feel very good, very comparable. I doubt that I would be able to tell them apart in a blind comparison if you just gave me the steering wheel and then I had to guess, is it the Asetek or the Simagic? I think I couldn't do that. This QR looks like, well, let me actually take this apart. Looks like that. So this is typically on the unit connected to this cable. It's also very good, no flags. It does have a very high price point for the wheel side. It's 150 euros, unfortunately. But it has one big advantage. They do not use like wireless power transmission. As you can see, there's a cable coming out of the shaft. They actually use a slip ring to transfer the whole USB signal to the quick release. And you can see there are these little pins here on top. 6 pogo pins, and you have the 4 signals for USB on there. And then on the wheel side, you have these 6 pads, and you can just connect your steering wheel either via this short USB cable, very nice for existing wheels, or there's also the possibility to connect it internally to any steering wheel. So you have the 6 pads that will give you the full USB signal, and then here you can just like solder your steering wheel USB connection directly to it and have everything internally. I think this is a very, very nice solution, because with this you can basically make any steering wheel, I don't want to say wireless because there are wires involved, but it's pretty much wireless for you in a way how to attach and detach the wheels. I think I personally would probably still go with the Simagic Alpha Mini because I just like the classy look of this, the matte black. Not a huge fan of the more gamer look of the Asetek bases, but still both of these bases perform very well and you can't go wrong with either. I think if Asetek was to offer the La Prima base for around 650 euros without a steering wheel, it would be a very tough choice between these two. Alright, honestly I think there's nothing else that should be mentioned here. There's the VRS base at 900 euros, but you need to add a QR, then you're looking at more like 1100 euros, which then is very close to the Simagic Alpha Ultimate, which would probably be a better buy at that price point. At least if it performs as well as the Mini. I haven't tested it, but if it's not worse, then I would probably pick up the Alpha Ultimate. So yeah, to sum it up, I was very pleasantly surprised by this base. I think the force feedback is very, very good and only falls short to the offerings from Simacube. The QR, in my opinion, is the best on the market. It's very nice and satisfying to put on a wheel. You have the power on the QR. If they maybe can develop a second version that works similar to the Asetek stuff and also has the USB signal on the QR, that would be the absolute winner. And I think the only downside that I can really see is the little odd cable placement on the side. I've had no reliability issues in my testing phase with this unit, but typically it takes several months or years to really find out how reliable a unit is. So I think this is not really information that reviewers like me can really give you. Rated at 10 Newton meters, but it feels more than those 10 Newton meters. I think it hits the perfect sweet spot for most people. And it's probably the direct drive that most of you should buy. I hope I'll get the Alpha Ultimate for testing soon as well. If that one performs just as well as the Mini, just with more headroom, then I think it could be the best bang for the buck direct drive you can buy. But yeah, that's it for the review. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below. Or join one of the live streams. I also now stream on YouTube, by the way, every Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday at around 12:30 German time. We also have a community Discord. Feel free to join that. And yeah, if you liked the video, maybe give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel to not miss any future videos. And thank you very much for watching. I hope to see you on the next one. Bye bye.